Stephen King's stories didn't just shape modern horror. They helped define the entire VHS era of late-night rentals and worn tape boxes on video store shelves. From haunted places and dangerous obsessions to creatures, curses, and slow-burn psychological dread, his adaptations covered nearly every corner of the genre. This episode isn't a ranking, and it's not just deep cuts. It's a curated tour through 10 Stephen King horror films every genre fan should see. A mix of major titles and cult favorites that show just how wide his movie legacy really is. If you grew up discovering horror one tape at a time, a lot of these will feel familiar, and a few might be overdue for a return visit. The Shining, 1980. Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is one of the most iconic horror films ever made. A haunting blend of psychological terror, surreal imagery, and meticulous craftsmanship. Adapted loosely from Stephen King's novel, it tells the story of Jack Torrance, an aspiring writer who takes a winter caretaking job at the remote Overlook Hotel with his wife Wendy and young son Danny. As the snow closes in, the isolation and supernatural forces of the hotel push Jack into a violent descent into madness. Jack Nicholson delivers a performance for the ages, balancing charm, menace, and full-blown insanity. His gradual unraveling, from frustrated father to axe-wielding madman, is both terrifying and darkly mesmerizing. Shelley Duvall, as Wendy, gives an equally powerful performance, her nervous energy and fragility grounding the film in emotional reality. And Danny Lloyd, as Danny, captures the vulnerability of a child burdened with the psychic ability known as the Shining, which makes him a target for the hotel's malevolent forces. Kubrick's direction is meticulous. Every frame feels deliberate, from the vast tracking shots through the hotel's empty corridors to the unsettling symmetry of its rooms. The Overlook itself becomes a character, alive with whispers, visions, and ghostly inhabitants who blur the line between past and present. The chilling score, with its discordant strings and booming tones, adds to the oppressive atmosphere, making the hotel feel like a trap, closing in on its occupants. What makes The Shining endure is its ambiguity. Is Jack driven mad by supernatural forces, or is the isolation enough to unearth his demons? Kubrick refuses to provide easy answers, letting the horror seep into the spaces between what's shown and what's left unsaid. The imagery, the river of blood from the elevator, the ghostly twins in the hallway. Here's Johnny, has become part of cultural memory, endlessly referenced and imitated. At once grand and intimate, The Shining is a meditation on madness, family, and the destructive power of obsession. More than 4 decades later, it remains as chilling and hypnotic as ever, a film that redefined what horror could be and still casts its shadow across the genre. Creepshow, 1982. 5 short horror stories unfold like panels torn from a pulp comic book. Each one follows a familiar pattern. Flawed people make selfish choices, and something unpleasant comes back to collect. A murdered man returns for Father's Day revenge. A strange meteor crashes on a rural farm. A sealed crate holds something that shouldn't be fed. The setups are simple, and the outcomes are rarely subtle. The film leans heavily on tone and presentation. Everything is heightened but intentional, from the dialogue to the performances. The cast is stacked with recognizable faces: Hal Holbrook, Adrienne Barbeau, Leslie Nielsen, Ted Danson, along with Stephen King in front of the camera as an unlucky farmer. Performances stay mostly straight, letting the exaggerated situations speak for themselves rather than pushing for comedy. Visually, the movie commits fully to its comic book influence. Bright primary colors, hard shadows, and animated transitions separate each segment. Tom Savini's effects work is prominent throughout, favoring tactile makeup and practical creatures over realism. Rotting corpses, swarming insects, and creature attacks are presented with a deliberate artificiality that fits the style. Creepshow doesn't try to reinvent anthology horror. It sticks to simple morality tales and delivers them with confidence and consistency. It's playful, occasionally nasty, and designed to be revisited. Less about surprise, more about enjoying the ride through familiar, well-crafted scares. Christine, 1983. John Carpenter adapts Stephen King's novel about a 1958 Plymouth Fury with a murderous spirit. Teen Arnie Cunningham buys Christine as a rusted wreck and becomes obsessed with restoring her. But as the car is revived, Arnie changes too, transforming from bullied outcast into a dangerous, obsessive figure whose personality mirrors Christine's malevolent presence. Keith Gordon conveys Arnie's corruption convincingly, shifting from sympathetic to frightening as the car asserts its influence. Alexandra Pauls Lee notices the danger, while John Stockwell's Dennis observes helplessly. Harry Dean Stanton plays Detective Junkins, investigating the mounting deaths around Christine with weary authority. Christine herself is filmed with fetishistic attention, the camera lingering on curves and chrome. Restoration sequences show the car repairing itself through clever practical effects, while attack scenes display intelligence and menace. The Flaming Christine sequence combines stunt work and visual spectacle to chilling effect. Carpenter elevates what could be a gimmick into effective horror, using widescreen compositions and a synthesizer score to make Christine feel alive. Themes of obsession, toxic attachment, and possession drive the story, showing how a machine can dominate its human owner with as much terror as any supernatural monster. Cujo, 1983. A friendly Saint Bernard is bitten by a rabid bat after wandering into a cave. As the disease takes hold, the gentle family dog slowly deteriorates, confused at first, then violent and uncontrollable. At the same time, a mother and her young son become stranded at a remote farm when their car stalls during a brutal heat wave. With no help coming, they're trapped inside the vehicle, while Cujo prowls outside, diseased, desperate, and increasingly aggressive. Survival becomes a matter of endurance. Against the dog, the heat, and dehydration. Louis Teague directs Stephen King's adaptation with relentless focus on claustrophobic tension. Dee Wallace delivers an exhausting, committed performance as the trapped mother, carrying the film through escalating physical and emotional strain. Danny Pintaro is convincingly vulnerable as her son. Multiple dog performers, combined with mechanical effects, give Cujo a frightening physical presence. Foam-flecked jaws, bloodshot eyes, and erratic movements that chart the progression of rabies. Most of the film is confined to the car, turning a mundane space into a pressure chamber. Teague emphasizes heat, thirst, and exhaustion as much as physical threat. Cujo's attacks are sudden and brutal, staged with practical effects that avoid exaggeration. The danger feels immediate and unavoidable. Cujo strips away the supernatural for pure survival horror. It's simple, relentless, and deeply uncomfortable, anchored by Wallace's performance. A brutal King adaptation that proves terror doesn't need monsters, just isolation, inevitability, and nowhere to run. The Dead Zone, 1983. Adapted from Stephen King's novel The Dead Zone, showed a different side of David Cronenberg, one that could explore empathy and tragedy without losing his fascination with the human mind under strain. Christopher Walken stars as Johnny Smith, a small-town schoolteacher who wakes from a 5-year coma with psychic abilities that allow him to see a person's future through touch. What begins as a gift quickly becomes a curse, as Johnny realizes he can prevent terrible things from happening, but only through acts that destroy his own life. Unlike the bodily mutations of Videodrome or The Brood, the transformation here is internal, psychological. Cronenberg strips away the surrealism and replaces it with cold emotional clarity. The wintry landscapes of rural Maine mirror Johnny's isolation, and Walken's fragile, haunted performance gives the story its aching center. This is horror without monsters. Only fate, consequence, and unbearable moral weight. The film's slow pacing and restrained direction give its final act devastating power. Johnny's confrontation with Martin Sheen's apocalyptic politician feels prophetic, capturing both the paranoia and cynicism that would define late 20th century politics. Yet even amid the bleakness, The Dead Zone is one of Cronenberg's most human works, a meditation on sacrifice, purpose, and the limits of power. Released the same year as Videodrome, it proved that Cronenberg could do more than shock. He could devastate. The Dead Zone is about the horror of knowing too much, of seeing the future and realizing there's no way to escape it. Silver Bullet, 1985. Stephen King adapted his own novella cycle of the werewolf into this small-town creature feature where a wheelchair-bound boy becomes the only person who believes a werewolf is responsible for a series of brutal attacks. When adults dismiss his claims, he teams with his alcoholic uncle and protective sister to stop the creature before more people die. Corey Haim plays Marty Kozlaw with genuine kid energy, rather than Hollywood precociousness, making his determination feel earned rather than scripted. Gary Busey brings warmth and volatility as Uncle Red, the family outcast who's the only adult who takes Marty seriously. The sibling relationship between Marty and his sister Jane feels authentic, their rivalry giving way to partnership as the danger escalates. The werewolf design by Carlo Rambaldi is effective if somewhat bear-like, a hulking creature that moves with animal ferocity. The transformation effects are minimal. The film focuses on aftermath rather than process, but the creature's appearances deliver genuine menace. Director Daniel Atias keeps the pacing brisk and the small-town atmosphere convincing. The film captures King's ability to make ordinary communities feel lived in before introducing supernatural threat. Everett McGill's performance as the werewolf's human identity adds tragic dimension, playing a man fighting his cursed nature and losing. Silver Bullet works because it treats its young protagonist with respect, understanding that kids facing monsters require courage and resourcefulness rather than adult rescue. It's King adaptation as accessible creature feature that delivers both heart and horror. Pet Sematary, 1989. A doctor relocates his family to rural Maine, where a friendly neighbor shows him a small pet cemetery in the woods behind their home. Beyond it lies something older, an abandoned burial ground, with a reputation for bringing the dead back. When a personal tragedy hits, grief pushes aside caution. The decision to undo death comes with consequences, and what returns is never quite right. The story stays focused on loss rather than spectacle. Dale Midkiff plays the father as increasingly worn down, making choices driven more by exhaustion than madness. Fred Gwynne leaves the strongest impression as Judd Crandall, a well-meaning neighbor whose warnings come from experience rather than superstition. The child performances are handled carefully, with Miko Hughes as Gage, delivering moments that are unsettling precisely because of their restraint. The film doesn't soften its subject matter. Death is treated bluntly, and resurrection is shown as a corruption rather than a miracle. Practical effects give the undead a stiff, unnatural quality that reinforces the idea that something fundamental has been broken. The larger mythology, hinted at through the land itself, is never explained in detail, which makes it feel more ominous than elaborate lore ever could. Pet Sematary is a horror film built around grief and bad decisions. It isn't flashy, and it doesn't offer comfort. Instead, it asks how far someone might go to avoid loss, and what that refusal costs. Quiet, bleak, and emotionally heavy, it's one of the darker Stephen King adaptations of its era. Misery, 1990. A snowstorm, a crashed car, and a rescue that turns into a nightmare. This psychological horror thriller strips away monsters and the supernatural and replaces them with something far more grounded and unsettling: obsession and control inside a locked room. Directed by Rob Reiner and based on the Stephen King novel, the story follows a successful novelist who survives a winter road accident only to wake up in the home of his self-proclaimed #1 fan. What begins as care and admiration slowly reveals itself as something far more dangerous as isolation, dependency, and manipulation take over. The film is driven almost entirely by performance, especially Kathy Bates in her Academy Award-winning role, delivering one of the most intense villain portrayals of the era without relying on spectacle or special effects. James Caan plays the trapped writer, with a mix of vulnerability and calculation, turning small moments into high tension. Instead of large-scale set pieces, The suspense comes from everyday objects, routine interactions, and the constant sense that escape is just out of reach. That restraint is exactly what gives the film its staying power. Among King adaptations, this stands out for its focus on character psychology and contained terror, proving that some of the most effective horror stories happen in quiet rooms with locked doors. Sleepwalkers, 1992. A quiet town, a strange mother-son pair, and a growing sense that something isn't right beneath the surface. This early 90s horror entry blends supernatural mythology with small-town suspense and creature feature payoff. Unlike most adaptations, this story was written directly for the screen by Stephen King. The film follows a new student who arrives in town with his mother, immediately standing out as different, controlled, secretive, and socially distant. As he fixates on a local girl, it becomes clear that their family bond hides something ancient and predatory. The movie builds its threat around a made-for-film mythology involving shape-shifting beings who survive by draining life from specific victims, giving the story a folklore-like structure while still feeling modern and pulpy. When the truth comes into the open, the tone shifts from mystery to full creature confrontation. Visually, it leans into practical effects, transformation moments, and large-scale finale chaos, very much in line with early 90s studio horror that still carried late VHS-era energy. The film also features several quick cameo appearances from familiar horror names, adding extra fun for genre fans paying attention. This one sits firmly in the cult category of King-related films, bold, strange, and unapologetically stylized. Graveyard Shift, 1990. An overnight cleaning job in an abandoned mill turns into a descent into filth, darkness, and something waiting below the floorboards. This blue-collar creature feature leans hard into grime, sweat, and industrial decay. Based on Stephen King's short story, the film centers on a group of workers hired to clear out a long-shuttered textile factory. What starts as a rough but straightforward job quickly becomes dangerous as they uncover signs that the building isn't just dirty, it's occupied. The movie embraces its working-class setting, filling the screen with rusted machinery, flooded tunnels, and collapsing structures. The environment itself becomes part of the threat, creating constant unease even before the creature element fully emerges. The deeper the crew goes into the mill, the more hostile and claustrophobic everything feels. Brad Dourif appears in a memorable supporting role, bringing his signature intensity to the story, while the film's tone stays mean, pulpy, and unapologetically rough around the edges, very much in line with late-night cable horror of the period. It's one of the more underrated King adaptations, trading prestige and polish for atmosphere and creature-driven payoff. Dirty, loud, and relentless, it feels built for fans who like their horror tactile and hazardous, rather than refined. If you love discovering forgotten horror and cult cinema, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the films time forgot. Thanks for watching, and remember, always be kind and rewind, because every movie is someone's favorite.